Making levels is hard. It's arguably the most difficult part about making games, because it really tests the limits of how many different elements you can balance at once. Even when you have all the parts of the level made, the wrong layout can result in a really frustrating experience. And the first level I made was a really good example of this. Like when I was making it, I didn't even have the full moveset of the car made, and this one guy, he was not happy with it. So I went back to the drawing board and made a new level that covers every basic mechanic and all the other things I've made in the past few videos, as well as some new things that give it a bit more zip. Although I might have added a bit too much for a first level. I've got a solution for that I'll talk about later. Before we get to the juicy stuff, I'll catch you up on the car's abilities, the enemies, and the overall direction I want to take the game. The car you play as has a big shotgun that doubles as a vacuum cleaner wood chipper thing, and the way it works is when you left click, you build up a bit of charge, and after a short amount of time it shoots automatically. Yeah, it is pretty weak, but there's something you can do called clicking again, and again, and again, and again, and again. This big explosion is the main gimmick of the car, as it lets you do some downright evil movement tech. I've got a video that my friend recorded of him doing some ridiculous shit with the nuke, and yeah, I had to balance that. So the nuke now does 500 self damage, so sometimes it's better just to shoot the enemies like normally, just so you don't die. I've added a system that I can give different objects different properties, so in this case I can make the police flammable. I'll talk about the system in a bit more detail later. All you need to know is the red shells, when you build up over 5 charge, and explosions set stuff on fire. Because the police only have 40 health, doing 1/15 of that over the course of 10 seconds isn't really that useful. So adding like 10 damage on top of that every second, it won't really affect the larger enemies, but for the smaller enemies, because they've got such low health, that'll speed up how quickly they die. And if someone's on fire and it touches another flammable thing, it can spread that fire to that object. So that's basically how the gun works. Now when you do a right click, that's when the big vacuum cleaner activates. The way it works is it sucks in a bunch of enemies at once, and then when you hit them, it does crazy melee damage, and it gives you like a speed boost for each enemy you hit. When you do hit a big group, because you're contacting so many different enemies at once, it gives you like a ridiculous speed boost. The downside is that it uses up gallons of beer. To do most of the abilities, your car has to have enough beer in it, which fills up slowly when you're on the ground. When you're in the air, it only fills up about the third of the way. So this means your only real way of filling up the meter is by killing enemies. The enemies drop beer, which fills up your meter and heals you, so you gotta play super aggressive if you want to do well. Now if you're feeling a bit clever, you might say that if the vacuum cleaner takes up a bunch of beer, which is its main downside, but it also gets millions and millions of kills, which refills up the beer, wouldn't that lead to like an endless loop? And wouldn't that be a bit broken? You're right, but I've got a workaround for that I'll get to later. If you press shift, you can do a dash for a decent chunk of beer. It's good for when you crash in the middle of a group of enemies that need to escape. And it's also good in like situations where there's a bit of downtime between fights, and like you're just like idly building up beer. So it's just like another thing to do between encounters. Pressing F makes your car jump up off the ground for a little bit of beer. On its own it's alright, because you know, you can dodge some police cars with it, and some parts of the level like require you to jump. But its real power comes in combination of the nuke. When you hold space mid-air, you can change your rotation to aim yourself at the ground after jumping, and then nuke to the sky, change rotation again, and since you still have enough health to get off one more nuke, you can like angle your car perfectly right to the end of the level. As I've said before, I've got a plan to fix this. The last main ability of the car is a slam that costs the same amount of beer as a jump, and the way it works is it freezes your movement, flips you upright, then sends you down, and then when you hit the ground it freezes your movement again. And this ability, it seems pretty like basic, but the fact that it freezes your movement, it's the only thing keeping this game together. Because there's so many moments where you're just like losing control constantly. So having like an ability that just like reorientates yourself is really important. And that also like ties back into like one of the general gameplay loops I want this game to have. Because, you know, as you go faster, things get a lot more unpredictable. So you're basically just trading control for speed. And this is just a way to like instantly get all your control back, but also lose all of your speed. So if you want to, you know, play fast and loose to like get the highest ranks, you can do that. But it also won't be frustrating for someone who's just trying to play the game normally. So the slam is really important for this. In summary, you have a lot of movement options and a lot of ways to deal damage. It takes a bit of timing and resource management if you want to live. and you can gain speed really quickly, which also means you need to be careful as it can lead to some really unpredictable situations if you get too much speed. Now that we've covered the car, it's time to talk about the two basic enemies I've made so far. The smallest enemy is this cute little police guy that does 50 damage per second and drops a beer that heals you for 100. They can be killed by really anything. Like if you sneeze on them, they'll probably die. As they heal for twice as much damage as they do in 1 second, it's better just to risk taking that temporary damage to overall gain health. The problem is that in big groups, they might do more damage than you can survive in one shot, so you need to be at least like somewhat careful of them. When you suck them up, they bleed using the same system as the fire, so a big stream of guts and blood flies out the back. I'm going to use the same system to group different enemies up into like small, medium and large, and so the larger the enemy, the less damage the suck does to them, which will force you to use the gun a bit more. So I think that could be a pretty interesting way of balancing it. The police car is pretty beefy for how many there are, and if you're not careful they could do some serious damage and get to some crazy speeds. To balance this out, they're really stupid. Like, they run over their own guys and slam into walls just to try and hit you. This can be abused to get in some good damage when they're reversing out of a crash. They're flammable just like the police officers, and explode when killed, which means you can use the red shells to turn them into projectiles to clear entire roads with a bit of skill. Unlike the cops, they have their own effects when you sock them up. Now that we're all caught up on the gameplay, we can try and make a better level. The old one opened up fine for the first 2 seconds of gameplay, as there was some floating text telling you how to dash. Now, can we get a little CinemaSins ding here for the floating text, because this is such a butt-ass idea, bro. Normally, in any other game, a bit of floating text would be fine, it'd be a bit more immersive, whatever. But in this game, it does not work. 99% of the time, you're going too damn fast to notice that there was any text in the first place. So in the new one, I made the text part of the UI. It looks a little bit out of place with the other bits of UI, but it's miles better than the floating text. I think it'll be better when I remodel it. The new one also tells them the basic movement, and then gives them some space to test out how the driving feels. After that rocky start in the old level, it just nosedives. After dashing, the player's told to brake, but they only get a slight glimpse of it, so if they misread it and don't hit space, they just fly right off the edge. The new level slows down time at some bits to give the player a second to digest the information. It also puts them in situations where it's really obvious they gotta use, for example, the slam to get down to the floor at this bit, and then at this bit, since they saw the last time you needed to jump to get over things, they'll see that same formation and recognize that they gotta jump here. So that's just gonna help with getting the player to learn. Back in the crappy level, that ramp they're driving up had a bunch of beer on it, which fills up the meter after they dash, which, you know, I think that's fine. I like that a smart player might like pick up on this, and if someone doesn't realize this, it just tells them anyways. I think that fit pretty well, so I did preserve it in some way in the new one. They also get to see an enemy for the first time up here, which is a pretty bad idea because either they're going too fast and they splatter them against the wall, or they just don't know how to attack, so they just get shot to death slowly over a course of 30 seconds. If they survive that, they gotta do a tedious ass 3-point turn so they can drive their way down another ramp, which is where they get told to look backwards. I decide to use the fact that the camera is so shit that it clips through walls to tell you how to do the most important thing in the game. I chose to hide the information that tells you how to shoot your gun behind a crappy wall that you can't even read. Editor, kill everything, just kill everything. And it gets worse. When you nuke, if it even works, it sends you into a crowd of enemies, and because the player isn't used to reorientating themselves after nuking, they just get shot by the whole crowd all at once. The new version takes a bit longer to get to the nuke, and it teaches you how to slam and jump during that time, because you need to remember, in this level it doesn't even teach you how to do that. When you need a slam, you get a glimpse of the cops so you know what to expect, and then when you get to the bottom it explains how to build up charge, and it's a very obvious target to hit. The way I did it, it means the player learns 2 things at once, because these doors show up later, and you know, they're going to be shooting a lot. When you deal enough damage to destroy the door, it flies out and then deals damage to anything it hits. I placed the car behind the door so an explosion kills most of the enemies, and the rest get set on fire. This means you can get some beer to heal, even if you don't quite know what you're doing yet, and there's a checkpoint at the door, so it's not too frustrating to deal with if you get shot. After that brief encounter, I showed the player how to combine new abilities by using a dash and a jump to get up to a bridge. Now, I will admit this is going a bit fast, but I think I can just split this level up into 2 levels that cover the abilities and then a prelude that like just shows off the basic driving and then sets up the story. In the original level, after the fight, you get a whole yapathon about how the sock works, which isn't even accurate how it functions, like now, because it says you can only do it when you're at half or more beer, but right now, you can just like use it if you've got any beer whatsoever. After you blend up the police officers, there's a little sneak peek about how the police car works, because it demonstrates you can use it to kill other enemies with the explosion from it. After this, you see a big group of cops that you're probably going to drive towards, which causes the first few cars to spawn in. Like the introduction of the beer, I repurposed this bit in the new level because I like the way it sort of like goes against the players' expectations, because they're driving up there, they've seen the police officers, they're like, okay, I know how these guys work, I can deal with that pretty easily. And then that's when it like hits them with the police cars. I think that's a nice touch. So I added that with the big pile of beers, because I think that's a nice little surprise. In the new level, before you fight any real cars, you get a small glimpse of them on the bridge where the suck's introduced. There's a few beer crates on the bridge, which shows the player they can extend the duration of the suck with the beer. When you get off the bridge, you fly pretty far above the ground. This sort of gets the player to experiment with the slam, and when they reach the bottom, they're told that beer is used for all the abilities. And wouldn't you know it, there's a whole bunch of this stuff right there. Even though it's an initial shock, the player has a lot of time to avoid the cars, and because it's in a closed space, they've got a relatively safe environment to experiment with the police cars. And there's a checkpoint right before it as well, so this lets them get used to the police cars without being in any real danger. The next room demonstrates how all these mechanics can be used together, as the door kills a few guys, giving you a bit of beer. Then the car is coming from the left, giving you a bit of pressure to move right. And a little bit down the road there's a barricade with police officers, so you've got an option between shooting them, which will like break the barricade, guaranteed, or you can take the risk about slowing down from in the barrier and use the suck. From what I've seen, people tend to use the suck here because there's a good chance that at least one police officer will get pulled through the barrier, so that gives them an initial speed boost to power through the rest of them. And as they progress, they need to jump up, where they're told to build 15 charge, and there's a little nuke symbol so they know where to aim. In the old level, I didn't even have most of the abilities made, so it's not actually suited for the player at all. So after the cop car is introduced, the timer starts immediately, so it's just an endless slug of enemies and big white tunnels. I've skimmed over the timer in this video just to save a bit of time, but if you want a bit more detail on what it actually is and like how it functions in the game, you can check the last one. Anyways, back to this video. While the new level moves a bit fast, at least it's suited for the abilities. After the player nukes in the new level, they crash into a group of cars that explode, sending them flying through the beer shop, which starts the timer. The first thing they see is a line of cops that get exploded by a police car to keep them on their toes. Now, aside from that, this section has nothing really crazy going on here. It just takes a little bit of focus on experimenting with the abilities to dodge the police cars. After the initial first few waves, they get a bunch of free beer and a good run up for a huge jump into the next section. They go through a conveniently shaped vent in a parking lot and have to avoid being knocked into green goo by some more police cars. There's a lot of walls here, so it's really difficult to dodge the green goo, but since it's like one of the first few levels, I think that's fine, as they're only getting used to how the game feels. When they clear that room, they have to follow some arrows which lead to the same nuke symbol from before. After they land, they see a few goobers, but this is nothing really to worry about. Hopefully they remember they can destroy the doors though. At this point, they're probably a bit confused about why they're at the very start of the level again, and that's when the coolest shit ever happens. The entire building from the start of the level explodes a dozen times upwards, and then does 3 huge explosions a long ways. This one was up at the end of the level where they can use all the skills they've learned to blast through to the end. I'm gonna be honest, I've said this before, it is a bit overwhelming for a first level, but I think if we split this up, I've got someone good here. I think another advantage of having like a few levels that like slowly introduce the abilities is they'll also get used to like the sort of how the game feels, because it's kind of hard. You can't really explain how the turning works, how the accelerating works, how the deceleration works, how the braking works. That's something you kind of just got to figure out on your own over a bit of time. So the more time they got to learn that, the more fun they'll probably have when they get to the crazy stuff. It's easy to see the improvements from the last time with the different models and textures for the buildings I made, but I think the most important changes I've added are the bits of zip I added. When I say a little bit of zip, I just mean like it's a small detail that you would never really mention when you're talking about a game, but you're always going to be happy that it's there. I moved the whole project to the universal render pipeline, which means I can add post-processing effects like bloom and chromatic aberration that get stronger the faster you go. Something that really annoyed me was the camera clipping. For the free look camera, because it uses cinnamon machine, because it uses cinnamon machine, it has like the thing to fix camera clipping built in. Because the main camera doesn't use cinnamon machine, I had to use a raycast to do it manually. But I think it was worth the effort because it makes the game feel a lot better. Now a funny thing is, because of the camera clipping issue being fixed, that part in the first level is being completely destroyed. Like that first level might be the bottom level ever made, bro. Like, I'm starting to see why that guy was getting so mad at it. Something I've also had to redo is the explosions. Because, before I just, like, actually physically modeled the explosions. That did not look good at all. So I actually used the particle system, which looks really good with the bloom effects. And the last non-UI thing I've changed about the looks is the dev effects on the cops. So now they leave a lot of blood on the floor and explode more violently. Now, as you've probably noticed, the UI is a bit different. I've leaned into like the Nubby's Number Factory vibe with it. And the way I got it to work is I used like a separate camera to render the models, so I could put what they see onto the main screen. And I think it looks pretty nice. With the visuals out of the way, I want to talk about the different changes in gameplay that help the overall feel of the game. The red shotgun shells didn't feel distinct enough from the bullets, so I made them set stuff on fire, as I've mentioned before, and I also gave them double knockback. Now this is really important because the police cars have a bit more health now, so in one shot you can't kill them, but with the combination of the fire and the shot, it does a bunch of damage to them. So it sort of just rewards the player for putting in the effort to build up more charge. Now at the moment it's really easy to break the game. Now I don't mind like the game breaking, like this is supposed to be like a really loose, like crazy experience. It's the easy part I don't like. The biggest problem is sort of the dash, because it was fine on the ground, but in the air, you could just fly away with it. So that's why I put the mid-air beer limit, and then the nuke. As I showed you the video before, but yeah, you could just like fly around forever with it, so that's why I had to give it the 500 self-damage. Now about the nerf to the nuke, I know that sounds bad, but in normal gameplay you don't really notice it because you get so much beer from killing groups of it. You might actually get to the max amount of health from doing a nuke anyways. I think it's kind of funny I had to like do all this balance changing just because I made it so you could change your rotation mid-air. But you know, I think it was worth it overall. The last major change to the car is how the slam lines up the ground. Now, I actually had a bit of help from Matt with this. He's been in I think only one of my videos.
He's so hard right now.
But you know, you should check him out. Because like this really did help me like a bunch of the game. Because before, if you slammed on like a slope, you'd be facing outwards. So then when you do a dash, you'd fly off the slope and then you have to like land again. So now it just makes it feel a lot more smooth. Now the last thing I want to talk about this video is the little details in the map. I saw this video about this guy, he's making a game where you like use a sword to like slide around and like jump at enemies and stuff. If you're watching this video, you've probably seen him. But he talked about it at a part where he had to like move something one unit down, and that really improved one of his rooms of his levels. Little details like that are like really important to get. First little detail are these bins scattered around the map. They can be set on fire and spawn in little smaller bin bags that are also flammable, and since they're all classed as projectiles, you can just send a big swarm of flaming bin bags towards the police to do a bunch of damage and would cause a big chain reaction. The next thing I note I added were the bits of scaffolding. I used these to block off sections of the map until a later part. It forces the player to go somewhere else to progress. The doors that you have to shoot open fly out and deal damage like the bins, so you can actually squash enemies like an angerfoot. At most of the jumps I added invisible walls, or like little force fields that push the player in the right direction. I probably won't like add these in any like later levels, but for now, because like the player's just getting used to it, I think that's fine. When you break into the beer shop, there's a funny little bit where you can see the car fly through the window with the security cameras, which kind of just shows you how like ridiculously fast you're going. At the end of the same road, there's a curved wall that you can like slide on with a nuke. And it just feels like you're doing like a skateboard trick when you do it right. Now this next detail is probably the best example of how something really like small and insignificant can make the game feel a lot better. In the parking lot at the ramp that you have to nuke off, there's a tiny little invisible wall to make sure your car sticks to the road, and you don't even notice it, but it really just makes the game feel as seamless as possible. Like when I'm talking about bits of zip, like that's what I'm talking about, like just tiny little details that like sort of add up. There's one last bit I want to talk about at the end of the level. You see, I forgot to mention that you can find a door there, which opens up a whole new part of the level if you've got the time left. This little optional bit takes all the concepts of the level and blends them together in a fast-paced skill check. It opens up with a bunch of beer to get the player to full health after the last fight. After that, there's a jump and a drop, which gets the player to use the jump and the slam quickly as they race against the clock. When they reach the bottom, there's two roads with enemies everywhere, so they gotta make sure they know how the gun works. After that, there's an alleyway full of cops, so they gotta blend straight through them, which gives them a massive speed boost, sending them flying across a bridge, which causes a huge swarm of police cars to jump them. At the end of the road, there's a tunnel, and you and all those cars get funneled through. When you reach the bottom, there's the most enemies in the level. In the middle, you got corpses you can suck up to avoid the police cars coming from the side. Behind you, there's a swarm barreling towards you, adding even more pressure as you try to open the door with the timer running low as it starts catching on fire and the screen starts flashing red and you start sweating bullets until you realize there's 2 more rooms that are exactly like this one and the clock starts to run out and then you beat the level. That's what I want the game to feel like. Each individual mechanic is not that complicated, but because there's so many different things you gotta like keep under control, it's like you're going around putting out different fires everywhere. I've added like a few more different things like fire hydrants and I think I changed the direction of the light, but I think that's a pretty good update on where we're at now. Like we're really getting close to how I want the game to feel, and I think this is a good like jumping point to start working on some actual first levels to like sort of catch the player up. So yeah, thanks for watching.
About that prick's face when he saw the gat.
How about that? How about that?
Zip.